In November of 1894, inside the damp subterranean corridors of the old municipal prison, Warden Arthur Vance sat at his desk writing in a heavy leather-bound logbook. Outside, a bitter rain soaked the cobblestone streets above, but down in the lowest tier of the ward, the air was dry, cold, and smelled of ancient dust. For 3 weeks, workers hired by the city council had been clearing out a collapsed drainage tunnel beneath East Cell 4. The prison was built on what local historians called reclaimed ground, a gentle slope near the river that had supposedly been empty wilderness until the first settlers arrived in the early 18th century. That was the official story taught in every school book across the county. But as the crew dug past the 12-foot mark, their pickaxes did not strike native clay or bedrock. They struck polished stone. According to Warden Vance's original handwritten entry, the men cleared away a wall of fitted granite blocks that no modern mason in the city had built. Behind it lay a dry vault that stretched far beyond the perimeter of the prison walls, continuing directly beneath the city center. Down there, sitting in the silence of a chamber older than the Republic itself, was an iron-reinforced doorway embedded in subterranean masonry. And lying on a stone platform directly behind that door was something the city could never explain. Vance recorded the physical dimensions with the cold precision of a veteran officer. The skeletal remains discovered inside that sealed vault measured 9 feet and 4 inches from skull to heel. The skull itself was twice the size of an average man's, with massive jaw structures and distinct double rows of teeth. Vance wrote that the bones did not look like an anomaly or a medical deformity. They looked like the natural frame of a forgotten race that once walked these lands, long before any European ship ever sighted the coast. For 3 days, the prison was placed under a silent lockdown. No guards were permitted to leave the grounds. No telegraphs were sent to the press. On the 4th morning, 4 men in dark suits representing the State Historical Board arrived with unmarked wooden crates. They went down into the vault with lantern oil and iron bars. By nightfall, the crates were hauled up to a waiting wagon. The tunnel entrance was backfilled with liquid mortar, and Warden Vance was surrender his ledger. If you go to the city archive today and ask for call number 4B, the leather logbook for 1894 will be placed on your table. Turn to the pages covering November of that year, and you will notice something peculiar. The page numbers flow sequentially from 112 to 113, but the very next leaf, page 114, is noticeably different. The paper is slightly cleaner. The ink is darker, fresher iron gal formula. The handwriting attempts to mimic Arthur Vance's precise cursive, but the stroke weight is entirely wrong. On this replacement page, the entry for November 14th simply records a mundane repair to a leaky basement pipe and a minor dispute over bread rations in the mess hall. Whoever cleaned the record thought they had succeeded in erasing the discovery from history forever. They rebound the volume, stamped it with the official municipal seal, and returned it to the vault. But they made one fatal mistake. In the late 19th century, city archivists maintained a separate master cross-reference catalog. This master index was kept in a completely different wing of the building, updated daily by low-level clerks who indexed every ledger by topic, date, and keyword. When the operatives rewrote page 114 of the warden's logbook, they forgot to destroy the master index card in the secondary card catalog. If you open the dusty wooden index drawers today and pull the reference file for the 1894 Warden's Journal, entry 114 still sits there in faded blue ink. It lists the exact date, the exact cell number, and 3 plain words that were never meant to survive into the modern world. Subterranean vault, giant frame, iron door.
The existence of that index card changes everything we think we know about the historical record. It proves that the missing history of our world was not lost through natural decay, fires, or the innocent passage of time. It was methodically, systematically removed by hands that knew precisely what they were hiding. To understand how a discovery of this magnitude could be buried so completely, you have to look at the atmosphere of the city in the late 1800s. The late Victorian era was a time of intense civic pride and aggressive urban expansion. Cities across North America and Europe were tearing down old timber neighborhoods and erecting massive stone monuments to human progress. But beneath the surface of this booming modern world was a growing panic among institutional elites. Small-town newspapers from the 1870s through the 1920s were filled with strange reports that seemed to slip past the censors. Farmers plowing new fields in Ohio would break through the roof of an underground chamber and find skeletons of immense stature surrounded by strange brass armor. Coal miners in Pennsylvania would break through a seam hundreds of feet underground and discover perfectly laid brick walls embedded in solid rock formations that scientists claimed were millions of years old. Construction crews laying foundation footings in Chicago, Boston, and New York routinely struck deep subterranean arches, forgotten lower streets, and sealed stone doors located 30 feet below the modern pavement level. At first, these stories were published openly in local gazettes. Editors treated them as local curiosities, printing detailed measurements, witness names, and quotes from local doctors who inspected the remains. But around the turn of the 20th century, a sudden shift occurred. The tone of the press changed almost overnight. Reports of subterranean discoveries suddenly stopped appearing in major newspapers. Local historical societies were quietly absorbed into centralized state institutions. Private collections of unusual artifacts were purchased by wealthy philanthropic foundations and promptly moved into private storage vaults where the public was never allowed to enter. Consider the case of Thomas Finch, a senior night guard who was on duty at the prison the night Warden's vault was emptied. Finch was not an uneducated man. He had served 20 years as a watchman and maintained his own private daily diary, a small leather book that his great-granddaughter preserved in an attic trunk for nearly a century. In his diary entry for November 16, 1994, Finch wrote about the atmosphere inside the cell block while the state operatives were working below. He described heavy iron hammers echoing through the stone floors for 12 straight hours. He wrote that the men who came for the crates did not talk to the prison staff. They wore high collars and dark wool coats, and they moved with the quiet authority of men backed by federal power. Finch noted that when the crates were carried out of the lower entrance, one of the wooden handles snapped under the extreme weight. The crate slammed against the cobblestone steps, cracking open the side panel just enough for the lantern light to catch what was inside. Finch wrote that he saw a massive yellowed thigh bone resting in sawdust. It was nearly 4 feet long, thicker than the fence posts in his front yard, and attached to a knee joint that looked entirely human in shape, yet impossibly scaled up. Before the wagon drove away, the lead operative gathered the 4 watchmen on duty into the warden's office. He did not offer money, nor did he make dramatic threats. He simply laid out 4 pre-printed non-disclosure forms on Arthur Vance's desk and placed a heavy silver pocket watch on the wood. He told the men that if a single word regarding the contents of Cell 4 appeared in any newspaper, their pensions would be canceled immediately, their names would be placed on a state blacklist, and they would spend the rest of their lives in the very cells they were currently guarding. The next morning, Thomas Finch was quietly reassigned to a remote county workhouse 60 miles away. 2 other guards resigned within the week. By the following month, official city construction reports listed the cellar beneath East Cell 4 as a routine stabilization project caused by ground subsidence. The paper trail had been scrubbed clean. The official history was restored.
What happened in that prison vault was not an isolated incident. It was part of a widespread protocol that was executed across dozens of cities during the same exact decade. When you begin to cross-reference archived municipal records from the late 19th century, a startling pattern begins to emerge. Whenever a deep excavation project bumped into something impossible, whether it was a buried lower floor of a pre-existing city, an unrecorded stone complex, or giant skeletal remains, the same sequence of events unfolded with military precision. First came an immediate local lockdown under the guise of public safety or structural instability. Next arrived a team of specialized researchers from centralized state institutions or newly formed scientific foundations. Then came the total confiscation of all physical evidence, followed by a quiet rewrite of the official excavation logbook. In 1898, 400 miles away in a neighboring state, a municipal excavation team was clearing ground for the foundation of a new county courthouse. 12 feet beneath the street level, workers broke through a layer of dense yellow clay and hit the slate roof of an intact stone room. The city engineers assumed it was an old colonial root cellar or a forgotten smuggling vault from the Revolutionary War, but when they cleared the entryway, they realized the architecture was completely alien to anything built in North America. The walls were constructed from giant blocks of dark basalt, fitted together without a single grain of mortar, so tightly joined that a knife blade could not be inserted between them. The doorway was arched and stood over 12 feet tall. Inside the chamber were 3 stone alcoves, each holding a seated human skeleton that dwarfed the workers standing beside them. The city surveyor, a respected man named James Holbrook, took detailed measurements and made 4 draft sketches of the chamber before the site was cordoned off. Holbrook's field notes were submitted to the city council along with his weekly progress report. They were stamped as received on October 12, 1898. Yet, if you examine the bound volume of City Council minutes for October 1898 today, those 4 pages are completely missing. They were cleanly sliced out of the binding with a sharp razor blade, leaving only thin paper stubs near the spine. Whoever removed those pages assumed they had erased the event from history. But just like the prison warden's logbook, the record keepers made a critical oversight. Holbrook had sent a duplicate copy of his field sketches to a local land office as part of a routine boundary check. That duplicate map survived in a mislabeled folder in the county clerk's basement for over 80 years before an independent researcher uncovered it in 2014. The duplicate map shows the exact spatial coordinates of the subterranean chamber, sitting directly beneath what is now the main public square of the city. The notes in the margin, written in Holbrook's neat copperplate script, described the basalt blocks bearing carved symbols that resembled ancient Mediterranean script, alongside measurements indicating the skeletons belonged to individuals who stood between 9 and 10 feet tall in life. When researchers attempted to locate the physical chamber in 2018 using modern ground-penetrating radar, they discovered something even more disturbing. The chamber was still there, sitting 15 feet below the modern sidewalk, but the radar scans revealed that the entire room had been filled from above with dense iron-rich slag and industrial concrete, poured directly through drilled shafts sometime in the early 1900s to render the interior completely inaccessible to future generations. Why go to such extraordinary lengths to hide these sites? Why pour hundreds of tons of concrete into ancient stone rooms buried beneath small American cities? Why rebind official logbooks, cut pages out of city council minutes, and threaten humble prison guards with life imprisonment? The answer becomes clear when you look at what was happening to historical education during this exact era. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were the precise moment when our modern timeline was standardized. University departments were being established, national museums were receiving millions in funding, and official state narratives were being drafted to establish a clear, linear progression of human history. In this standardized narrative, America was a pristine, undeveloped wilderness inhabited only by simple hunter-gatherer societies until European colonization. There was no room in this newly constructed history for massive pre-existing masonry structures, underground stone cities, and ancient races of giant humans who possessed advanced architectural skills long before the first wooden cabins were built on these shores. If the public realized that modern cities were literally constructed on top of the ruined foundations of a vastly older, highly advanced civilizational layer, the entire narrative of human development would crumble in an instant. Questions would be asked that the newly formed academic establishment could not answer. Who actually built these lower layers? Where did they go? And why was their existence kept hidden from the people walking on the streets above?
To fully understand the scale of this historical suppression, we have to examine the phenomenon of buried city layers that exist directly beneath the streets of almost every major older city in the Western world. If you walk through the historic districts of places like Seattle, Chicago, Edinburgh, or modern European capitals, tour guides will often talk about the subterranean levels as simple engineering feats. They tell you that during the late 19th century, cities raised their street levels by 10, 15, or 20 feet to improve drainage, prevent flooding, or install modern sewage systems. They show you underground walkways with old shop fronts, vaulted brick ceilings, and cobblestones buried beneath modern asphalt. That is the comfortable explanation we are given in tourist brochures. But when you examine the actual architectural evidence on the ground, that simple story falls apart completely. In dozens of cities, the lower architectural layers display structural features that make no sense if they were built as ground-level structures in the 1800s. You will find massive stone arches buried 20 feet deep, constructed from multi-ton blocks that far exceed the engineering capacity or economic logic of early 19th century builders. You will see windows made of heavy stone frames that open directly into solid soil, doors that lead into buried rock faces, and foundation walls that descend 50 feet into the earth, ending in subterranean arcades that stretch for miles beneath modern downtown districts. In 1912, during the construction of a new railway tunnel beneath a major Midwestern city, tunnelers broke through a wall of hard clay and stepped directly into a subterranean street network that was completely unmapped. The street was lined with vaulted stone structures, supported by massive columns made of a dark, crystalline stone that did not match any local quarry. The ceilings were arched with incredible precision, and the walkways were paved with interlocking stone tiles that showed centuries of foot traffic. The chief engineer on the project, an Englishman named Edward Campbell, wrote a private letter to his brother in London describing the find. He wrote that the subterranean street sat nearly 40 feet below the current riverbed. He noted that the doorways along the underground avenue were enormous, measuring over 14 feet in height, with door handles mounted 6 feet off the ground. Campbell was an experienced civil engineer who had worked on projects across the British Empire. He knew the difference between a colonial cellar and an ancient subterranean highway. In his letter, he expressed sheer bewilderment at the scale of the structure. He wrote, "We are being told by the municipal commissioners that this is merely the remains of an early French trading post from the 1700s. But no fur trader in human history ever hauled 50-ton blocks of crystalline basalt into a river valley to build a 20-foot wide underground boulevard. This structure was here long before the French, long before the colonies, and perhaps long before the river itself took its current course." What happened to Edward Campbell's discovery? Within 48 hours of his letter being mailed off, the City Railway Board issued an emergency order halting work on that section of the tunnel. The official reason cited was an unexpected pocket of toxic gas. The tunnel route was quietly diverted 200 yards to the east, adding hundreds of thousands of dollars to the project budget. The entrance to the underground boulevard was sealed off with thick brick bulkheads, and all survey maps showing the anomaly were classified under municipal authority. When researchers attempted to locate Campbell's engineering logs in the city public library nearly a century later, they found the familiar signature of institutional intervention. The box containing the 1912 railway construction papers was present on the shelf, but the specific folder covering the months of March through August had been neatly removed. In its place was a white archival spacer card stating that the file had been withdrawn for administrative review in 1934 and never returned. This is the hidden pattern that repeats in every archive, every library, and every municipal vault you examine. The physical evidence is buried beneath concrete or diverted around. The written records are removed, rewritten, or quietly misfiled. And the public is left with a sanitized, simplified version of history that paints the past as a quiet, predictable progression from primitive wilderness to modern civilization.
When you assemble all these scattered pieces, the missing logbook pages, the unedited master indices, the buried basalt chambers, the giant skeletal remains, and the massive underground streets, a chilling civilizational picture begins to take shape. We are not the first advanced culture to occupy these lands. We are simply the latest occupants of a world that has been built, destroyed, buried, and rebuilt multiple times over vast spans of forgotten time. The cities we walk through today are not original foundations. They are top-layer settlements erected directly over the ruins of an ancient, sprawling urban network that covered the globe long before recorded history began. This ancient civilization possessed building capabilities that rivaled or exceeded our own, utilizing massive stone masonry, subterranean engineering, and architectural scales that suggest its inhabitants were vastly different from modern humans in both physical stature and capability. They built to withstand global cataclysms, constructing deep underground vaults, fortified subterranean highways, and massive stone complexes designed to survive thousands of years beneath layers of mud, silt, and clay. When modern settlers arrived in these regions in the 17th and 18th centuries, they did not discover an empty wilderness. They discovered the vast weathered remnants of this older world poking through the soil. In many cases, early European builders did not construct new foundations from scratch. They simply cleared out the upper levels of these ancient stone structures, built timber roofs over them, and claimed them as new colonial towns. As the 19th century progressed and centralized governments consolidated their power, the existence of these ancient lower layers presented a profound existential threat to the established world order. If the public was allowed to discover that an ancient race of giants had built the very foundations their cities rested upon, it would shatter the foundational mythologies of modern society. It would undermine religious institutions, scientific consensus, political authority, and the very concept of human origin and progress. So, a quiet, highly coordinated effort was launched across the Western world. Institutions like the Smithsonian, state historical societies, municipal archives, and university departments were given a clear, unspoken mandate: standardize the timeline, collect and isolate all anomalous physical artifacts, scrub the official records, and rewrite the narrative. For over a century, this system operated with incredible efficiency. Thousands of giant skeletons recovered from mounds and subterranean vaults were packed into wooden crates and shipped off to private museum basements, never to be seen by human eyes again. Hundreds of buried stone chambers were filled with concrete or declared unsafe for public access. Thousands of logbook entries, survey maps, and council records were quietly edited, rebound, or cut out with razor blades. They created a seamless illusion of history, a neat, tidy story that fit cleanly into textbooks and museum displays.
They taught us to look at the world above ground and ignore everything that lies beneath our feet. They convinced us that any story of buried giants or lost timelines was nothing more than folklore, myth, or internet conspiracy. But despite their immense power, despite their vast resources, and despite a century of careful record cleaning, they could never achieve total perfection. Human error always leaves a crack in the armor of secrecy. They forgot about the secondary card catalogs sitting in quiet basement corners. They forgot about the duplicate survey maps sent to obscure land offices. They forgot about the private diaries kept by humble night guards and railway engineers, preserved in family attics for generations, and most importantly, they could not destroy the physical structures themselves, the massive stone blocks, the buried arches, and the sealed iron doors that still lie waiting beneath the pavement of our modern cities.
Every time you walk down an old city street, every time you look at the heavy stone foundations of a 19th century building, and every time you see a window half buried beneath the sidewalk level, you are looking at the edge of a forgotten world. The missing page 114 from Warden Vance's logbook is not just an old piece of paper. It is a symbol of the great lie that has been painted over our collective past. It is proof that those who control the present will go to any length to control the past, reshaping memory, altering documents, and sealing away physical truth to preserve their authority over human consciousness. They rewrote the warden's ledger. They replaced the page with a story about leaky pipes and mess hall bread. They thought they had closed the file forever, but they failed to realize that truth has a way of outliving those who attempt to bury it. The missing page still appears in the index, sitting there in blue ink, waiting for anyone with the curiosity to pull the drawer, read the card, and ask the right questions. History was not lost, it was stolen. The real history of our world is still down there, resting quietly beneath the concrete, behind the backfilled tunnels, and inside the sealed vaults that officially do not exist. It is waiting for a generation that is no longer satisfied with the sanitized stories in the textbooks, a generation willing to look past the official narrative, inspect the anomalies, and uncover what was buried in the dark. If you were the kind of viewer who questions official narratives, who refuses to accept easy explanations, and who feels drawn to the buried truths of our past, you belong with us. Join our community of independent researchers and truth seekers by subscribing to the channel right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive into the hidden timeline. Share this video with someone who still believes everything they read in the history books, and leave a comment below with your thoughts on the missing logbook entries in your own city. Look closely at the ground beneath your feet, pay attention to the indices they forgot to erase, and never stop searching for the truth that lies buried beneath the surface.